Morning, I'm Bill Cullina. I'm the Executive Director here at the Morris Arboretum on this beautiful spring day with the birds singing in the background. I want to talk to you today about weeds, some common weeds that you'll see in the garden this time of year in early spring, things that have typically they've germinated in the fall, they've germinated in the late winter, or they're germinating now and they're coming up and flowering. Most of these that you'll see are annual species, that is, they complete their whole life cycle within one calendar year. So they're very fast growing. And one of the keys to controlling annual weeds is preventing them from going to seed. That seems pretty obvious, but by catching them before they go to seed, you can break that cycle. The other important thing to know about many of these annual species we're looking at is that the seeds are very small and they have a pigment in there that's light sensitive. So if you use mulch, if you put mulch on, especially in the fall, those seeds will be under the mulch, they won't be getting light, they won't germinate as easily. So mulching can be very effective in the garden for controlling a lot of these species, especially if they're not completely out of hand already.
I'm sure this plant is familiar to everybody. The flowers are just starting to open up in the morning sun. This is violets, and there are many different species of violets. Most of them are native to North America. They're wildflowers. They're food for things like fritillary butterflies, so important plants to nurture. However, there are some, like the common violet, Viola sororia, that can become weedy. And they become weedy in a very interesting way. They're perennials, but they form seed capsules that open up, and as the seed capsules dry after they open up, they squeeze the seeds, causing the seeds to eject out of the capsules 2 or 3 feet away from the parent plant, and that way they can spread. And then, even more interesting to me, they have what are called cleistogamous flowers later in the spring, that are flowers that are self-pollinating, that never open. And these actually flower down in amongst the leaves, so you don't see them. The seed capsules then burrow down into the ground and then open up, releasing the seeds underground. So it's sort of a backup reproductive strategy for the violet. Growing right next to the violet is another common lawn weed, garden weed that you see blooming very early in the year. This is a veronica, and I think this is Veronica persica, one of the creeping veronicas. It has these tiny little blue flowers. There's a number of species that are either white flowered or blue flowered, but this one has those distinctive notched leaves. And anyway, very, very fast growing, cool season annual. So this will germinate in the fall or very early in the spring and bloom and do its thing. The flowers open up when the sun comes out and then close in the shade. So I'm going to wait and see the sun. If the sun comes out, then I'll film this again. You can see how the flowers open up a little bit once they get into the light. I've got a little spot here where there's a little bit more sun, and you can see those cute little blue flowers. They really are adorable little things if you look at them very, very closely. And again, the way to control these early season annuals is to prevent them from seeding. So as long as you weed these out of your garden before the seeds are ripe, then you shouldn't have any trouble with seeding. Well, next up is a plant that may be familiar to you, and if it is, Godspeed, because it's a difficult one to get rid of. This is Lesser Celandine, Ranunculus ficaria. It is a buttercup, and it is very insidious because it flowers and spreads by seed, but it also forms these little tubercles on the base of the plant that when you pull the plant out, it leaves them behind, and you end up with more Lesser Celandine than you had before. And I'll dig one of those out. I'll take a look at those. I pulled one of the Lesser Celandines up. Notice the base of the plant there, these little tubers that are very easily busted off. All you have to do is pull that plant up, and then that little tuber leaves behind in the soil, and then can grow, as you can see with this little guy here. It grows into a new plant, so very challenging to remove. It's a little depressing to look out at this, but this is a portion of the lawn, and you can see the Lesser Celandine's a little out of control in this area. So At this point, very difficult to control this without herbicides when it's gotten this far. Although if you catch it in your garden beds and you really stay on top of it, you can keep this plant in check. It does go dormant fairly quickly for the year, so it comes up very early, flowers, and then goes dormant. You can see how this, if you know marsh marigold, Caltha palustris, it looks a little bit like this plant, but grows in completely different habitat. Marsh marigold is a wetland species and a native species, and this is typically more of a garden weed, although it gets into rich forests and spreads quite abundantly there too. All right, well, this next plant, again, a very common weed. This is bitter cress, Cardamon. It's a cool season annual, so it germinates very early in the spring, late winter, comes up, flowers. It has a very quick life cycle. In fact, a lot of them in this area are already going to seed, and the seed capsules are starting to release. The seed capsules are those reddish, long, thin things that you see sticking out above the flowers. So if you touch those when the seed capsules are ready, they will eject the seeds a few feet away, starting more plants. So this is a common plant that you find in sidewalk cracks, in gardens, in nursery pots. Really the best way to control it is just to stay on top of it and keep it from ripening those seeds. If you keep it from ripening the seeds, it will fade out over time. And if you have this in the lawn, it means you're probably mowing your lawn too much and allowing that sort of open ground that it likes to grow. This is bitter cress. Up next, dead nettle. This is Lamium purpureum, another winter annual. It's a very pretty plant, and actually you can eat these. They're a little tough now that the flowers are really out, but they come up very early, and you can use it as a wild edible green. But this is called dead nettle because if you've ever been stung by stinging nettles, you know what that feels like. These look to some people a little bit like a nettle, but they don't sting, hence the dead nettle terminology. But again, as an annual, the main thing is to control this by preventing it from going to seed. This is actually in my vegetable garden, and I tilled this in the fall. These all developed they germinated after that, and now they're flowering, so I'm about to till them in again. And if I keep doing that, it's a way I can really control this in the vegetable garden. You can see I got quite a lot of this in the old vegetable garden, but easily taken care of with a little light tilling. This is similar to another species called henbit dead nettle. The main difference is you don't get those purple leaves, purple bracts with the flowers the way you do with purple dead nettle. Chickweed is abundant this time of year. Also a cool season annual, winter annual. Chickweed is one of those wild plants that's growing in popularity as an edible. You can eat all parts of this, above ground parts of this plant. This is the common chickweed. It has hairless leaves, tiny little white flowers. You may be able to make out a few of those flowers, many-petaled flowers. And it has this sort of crab-like growth habit where it spreads out along the ground and from a central point. And so when you pull it out, you tend to get these big mats of leaves. There's another species that I'll show you up close the difference in just a second. Mouse-ear chickweed is another very common introduced winter annual that's blooming at the same time, same sort of a habitat as common chickweed. The main difference is you can, I think, see in this video that the leaves are covered with fine hairs. Obviously, it stands to reason if you eat something that's covered in hairs, it's not so good. So you can cook this and use it, but typically people look for the common chickweed that has, if I can move some of it in, much smoother stems, and they really lack those hairs that you see on mouse-ear chickweed. The final early flowering garden weed I wanted to showcase today is Creeping Charlie. Creeping Charlie there with those purple flowers. I put a piece of the Lamium, the dead nettle, next to it so you can see the difference. pinker flowers and those reddish leaves or bracts on top of the plant. Creeping Charlie, a familiar lawn weed, garden weed. This is more of a perennial. It roots as it goes, and it can be a little challenging to get rid of, although if you use a weeding knife or something where you can just slice underneath the plant and remove those rooted stems, you can keep it under control. I actually kind of like it in my lawn as a food for foraging bees, and it's sort of pretty, and you can control it by mowing. But that is Creeping Charlie. I hope this video has been interesting for you, helpful. Certainly if you have weeds you can't identify, please look up our weed clinic on the Morris Arboretum website. We have experts, we have some great botanists on staff that can identify things for you and try to figure out what to do about them. Thank you.